UFC pay-per-views in 2024 were a hit or a miss, to be honest. And today, in the form of a tier list, we're going to be ranking these motherfuckers from S tier to D tier, starting with UFC 297 in January and ending with the most recently 310 from December. Now, dude, UFC in 2024 was a good year, I feel like, for the UFC. We did have some high highs. We had UFC 300, all that shit. But, dude, in general, there were some low lows this year. We had John Jones holding up the heavyweight division the entire year. We had Apex cards for a majority of fight nights and weak ones at that. We had undeserved and random as hell title shots just being given out left and right. So, there were some weak moments for 2024. In terms of the pay-per-views themselves, like I said earlier, some hits or some misses, and today we're going to be ranking them all. So just getting into 297, and really quick, I did do fan polls over the past few days for every single pay-per-view, because I wanted to hear your guys' thoughts as well. I mean, we're here to fucking talk MMA. So, and on top of that, just in case I'm stuck between two, like there's a tiebreaker or something, that way you guys can be the tiebreaker. So just starting off with 297. So this is going in D, okay? I'm just jumping straight into it, man. Like, this was a really weak pay-per-view to start off the year, okay? The main event was intriguing, cool concept, and the main event ended up delivering, fun little 5-round war, but extremely controversial result. Here's the fucking thing, you guys. We're gonna go to war for you fucking people, you know what I mean? And just in general, I mean, the second highlight of the card was what? Neil Magny, fraud checking Mike Malott, which just, let's talk about Mike Malott and the Canadians for a second, too, because obviously this card took place in Ontario, Canada. Dude, these guys, the Canadians, lost every single fight that they had on the card. And like, I'm not even Canadian, and to any Canadian viewers watching, respect y'all for dealing with whatever that was, because like I don't even live there, and it just made me feel sad. It just kind of killed the momentum of the card. There were barely any finishes on this card. Most of the fights were duds. And again, if Neil Magny getting a fraud check win over a prospect is a highlight of the card, the second biggest in my opinion, then something is clearly wrong here. Or sorry, oh my god, I completely forgot about Movsar Evloev and Arnold Allen. Well, that was a fun scrap, don't get me wrong. Not much depth to this card. Not much depth in terms of name value. Not much depth in terms of highlights, finishes, wars, whatever the fuck. So overall, Canada had it rough. The viewers had it rough. This was a very weak card to kind of start off the year, especially ending the card. Most people thought that Strickland won the fight, even though it was a fun one. Nobody could even talk about it or think about it because everyone was just complaining about it. So, and it's interesting, here we are a year later, and now these guys are running it back, and now people don't want to see Strickland get the title shot. So, oh, and one more fucking thing, dude. This WMMA title shot, co-main event. It's just, I'm so sick of these, dude. Raquel Pennington versus Mara Bueno Silva. And I understand that, this was right after Amanda Nunes left, so they were fighting for the vacant belt. I get it. But, dude, this is your co-main of an already weak card. Like before Strickland and DDP stepped up, this was going to be the main event. To make it worse, so I don't know, just this belongs in D+, because Evloev and Allen was a fun fight, and the main event was good, but not much else. So moving on up next to UFC 298 in February of Volkanovski versus Topuria. I'm a big Volk guy, so this one fucking hurt, dude. But just in general, this pay-per-view was a good one at that. I'm stuck between putting it in A or B, but like I said at the top of this video, I'm going to be using your guys' fan polls as a tiebreaker. So most of you guys had this in S or A, so I'm going to be putting this at the bottom of A. The main event, as depressing as it was for me and a lot of Volk fans, seeing like the rise of Topuria and him getting the highlight knockout, I mean, it is what it is, it's a big finish. It was a really intriguing main event. I mean, just seeing the whole betting odds and the whole perspective on the fight change before and after Volk fought Makhachev the second time and get knocked out. I mean, very interesting, the whole build-up. The co-main, Whitaker versus Costa, was a fun fight. Jeff Neal versus Ian Gary, kind of under-delivered, bit of a pitter-patter fest. Marab versus Cejudo had some good moments at least. Anthony Hernandez got a 6 sub over Roman Kopylov. And then, good finishes from Marcos Rogerio de Lima, Zhang Min Yang, who just got a sick finish at Macau. Those guys were on the prelims. So there were some good moments. There were some good fights in this card. It's a bit on the early prelims as well. But in my opinion, this is a B+, but I was stuck between putting in A because there were some really good moments. So there were also some lows. So that's why I feel like I'm going to use this as a tiebreaker. I'll put this one at A-. Moving on up next, UFC 299 was headlined in March by Sean O'Malley versus Tito Vera. And dude, one of the most undeserved title shots. But regardless, I'm going to be putting this card in the S tier. I mean, from top to bottom, this was an amazing card. I mean, amazing highlights, amazing finishes. We had some really fun fights. I know that they wanted to kind of build the foundation of Sean O'Malley because the card where he won the title against Sterling, not only was it a weak card and it underdelivered, but it just wasn't stacked. The big draw of that card was O'Malley versus Sterling. And I think that's why Sterling was like, dude, these pay-per-view numbers fucking bite, because O'Malley at the time, and you could argue even now, he's not a big enough draw to actually get fight fans to buy the damn pay-per-view or get people to tune in that weren't already, So they built him up a really stacked card, and damn, it worked. I'm sure the numbers are good on this one, because the co-main of Dustin Poirier getting the KO over Benoit Saint-Denis, Kevin Holland and MVP having a really fun fight to welcome him in the UFC, JDM getting a sick finish over Gilbert Burns, Petr Yan back in the win column with a fun fight over Sonya Dong. The prelims were stacked as well, good finishes on there, fun fights. So overall, I mean, this belongs in the S tier. The name value was there, the depth of the card was there from the the first fight to the last, you were entertained, you were intrigued. So from early prelims to the main card, it was fantastic. So the UFC in general, I get that they'd like to stack up March cards, but I feel like they did want to kind of just pad up the hype for Sean O'Malley. So, and get him that one more title defense, you know? I do think that while the main event, the title shot was not deserved, one of the most random of all time, in my opinion, just regarding what, like fucking flyweight. I do think that Sean O'Malley put on a clinic, 50-45'd him, had some entertaining moments, and kind of like at the time validified himself as the champion and made up his loss. So overall, really good card, a lot of sick finishes, feel good energy in the air. And yeah, just moving on up next to pretty much, you could say the same thing about this next one, UFC 300 in April. I really don't have much to say about UFC 300, just simply because I didn't even do a poll for this one, simply because it's UFC 300. You know, it's one of if not the greatest cards of all time, so it's going in S. I don't have really much to say. We all know what the deal was with UFC 300. I get that there was a lot of like controversy kind of going into it because like it didn't really have a main event yet, and then when the main event got announced, people weren't happy with it, and like just the way they were releasing the fights in order, like they started by giving us like an Aljamain Sterling fight and a Jessica Andrade fight, and we're like, what the fuck is UFC 300? So I think they could have handled the build-up a lot better, just the branding, the marketing, but in terms of the pay-per-view itself, how it delivered, how were the fights, how were the performances, how was it? It completely delivered, you know, it went above and beyond, you know? People were putting their goddamn lives on the line to get that that $300,000 bonus, man. So from top to bottom, fantastic card. The name value was there. It completely blew away our expectations for the most part, or lived up to them, because I feel like we as fans had a lot of hype going into it, but they weren't really delivering it. So I feel like everybody got what they wanted in the end. It's going to be one of those cards that we look at in time for the next decade until UFC 400, and just regarding to it as that was that card, you know, like that was the almighty of almighty until we get 400. So it's going in S. That's fucking plus. Moving on up next to UFC 301, one of the two Pantoja headliners this year. Obviously, this was the big Brazil card this year. So, you know what? This was a pretty underrated card, to be honest, in my opinion. I get that in terms of name value and depth, one of the weaker ones of the year. I mean, in terms of the lineup itself, this probably was the weakest pay-per-view of the year. But I actually think that it went above the expectations, man. I think that this had some really good moments. We had some good fights, some good finishes in here. The main event kind of lived up to it, or not lived up to it, because a lot of people didn't really have expectations for the main event. It was just Pantoja's first main event as the champion, and like there was a lot of pressure on him or whatever, but it ended up being an entertaining fight. But unfortunately, a lot of people thought that Usyk won, so it kind of took away the win from him. Nobody was really talking about like, Pantoja, what a sick fight, what a sick win. Everyone just saw that Usyk won. I mean, me personally, I did 3-2 for Pantoja. Maybe that's controversial. Well, it definitely fucking is. But other than the main event, right? How was the card itself? There was some good moments on here, man. I mean, the co-main with Jose Aldo and Jonathan Martinez was entertaining. Anthony Smith, you know, destroying everybody's parlay, did suck financially, but getting the surprise win in the first round of all things against Vitor Petrino was entertaining to see. Michel Pereira, round 1 sub. Kyle Barajo with a round 2 knockout over Paul Craig. We had some fun fights on the early prelims and prelim as well. So, you know what? I'm going to put this one at the very bottom of B. You could argue top of C. You could even say D, whatever the fuck, but I'm going to put this one at the bottom of B. I understand that the name value and the depth wasn't there, and this card was definitely one of the least hyped going into it for sure, but I do think that it went above and beyond the expectations, the very little expectations that people had for it. There were some good moments here. Alessandro Costa, Mauricio Ruffi, those guys got round 1 or round 2 knockouts in the early prelim. So overall, man, while I am going to be standing on, stand your base, stand your fucking base, I'm going to be standing my base on this one, that I do think that this is going to be a B-. So moving on to UFC 302 for June, Makhachev versus Poirier. Maybe this one's controversial and the fan polls do not add up at all, in my opinion, to what this pay-per-view actually was, but I'm going to put this in D, okay? I'm going to put this in D. This card, other than the main event, dude, had fucking nothing. Behind the main event, which, by the way, one of the best fights of the year, Makhachev versus Poirier, absolute fucking war. And Poirier, with this semi-retirement fight, I mean, the whole build-up was wholesome. The whole fight lived up to it, and him lasting 5 rounds was great. It was a war. But what else was on this card? Because behind it was Jailton Almeida getting the finish, which, if Jailton Almeida is the second best performance, second most entertaining performance of the night, don't get me wrong, good win for Almeida. Showed dominance and got him out of there quick. But if that, and then he was saying on the mic afterwards, like, I heard there were no finishes tonight. I had to go and get one. And hey, respect, you gave us something, so I appreciate it, you know, but it's just the co-main absolutely under-delivered. Here's the fucking thing, you guys. We're gonna go to war for you people. There was no war, dude. It totally did not live up to it, and people put all the blame on Costa, but it's not all on him, man, you know? Kevin Holland got a good round 1 sub over Mikhail Olasejchik, but is that it? You know, Nico Price and Alex Morono going to a dud of a decision was on the main card. Just no name value on this card. A bunch of random mashups. So many decisions. A lot of decisions. And it's just like I was falling asleep by the co-main, which again was supposed to be one of the most hyped up fights of the night. So this card totally under-delivered besides the main event. I mean, without the main event, the reason why I think that this was the worst pay-per-view card of the year, in my opinion, there is nothing here without the main event, you know? And you could argue all you want about the Kevin Holland and the Jalen Almeida finishes, but like, what else, dude? This card just had nothing besides the main event, and for that reason, I'm gonna put it in D. It was just boring a lot of times, man. You know, and it's unfortunate, big letdown, but it is what it is. This was the weak point in terms of pay-per-views for the year, in my opinion. So moving on up next to UFC 303, the other June pay-per-view, headlined by Pereira versus Prochazka, the rematch. This was a cursed card, to say the fucking least. We had so many canceled fights on this card, and just like, especially with the whole like Dan Ige stepping in on 3 hours notice, while that was so amazing to see, it was a great moment for Dan Ige. I mean, just so random, you know, and this card was just cursed. Jamal Hill versus Khalil Roundtree, Conor McGregor versus Chandler was supposed to headline this one, then Olberg stepped in, then Anthony Smith was supposed to fight Olberg, then he pulled out. I mean, and like I said earlier, Brian Ortega was supposed to be the original opponent for Diego Lopez. Dan Ige steps in. This card was absolutely fucking cursed, and all due respect to Pereira and Prochazka for stepping in. Pereira, man, stepping in once again to save the day, and nobody gives enough credit to Prochazka. You know, Prochazka stepped in to save the day at 295 as well with Pereira, and now he came to do it again. So it didn't work out for him both times, unfortunately, especially this one. But the main event, man, it was a sick highlight for Alex Pereira. I remember being in the bar watching it with my buddies, and the place went insane when he got the head kick. So really fun main event. Two of the most entertaining guys pound for pound on the roster. But let's talk about other than the main event, right? There wasn't a lot on this card. For the co-main, while the first round really was fun, it wasn't like the most crazy fight ever. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't a bad scrap by any means, but Jalid Zane Smith, that was a bad scrap. Ian Gary versus MVP, that was a boring fight as well, and controversial a bit for some people. Bueno Silva versus Chiesa ended to finish on the main card, but the fact that that's on the main card, that's the thing, you know what I mean? So the main card was pretty weak besides the main event, which definitely does hurt it, but the prelims kind of do save the card because we had Joe Pyfer getting a crazy fucking knockout. Gene Silva got a sick finish. Peyton Talbot got the round 1 20-second knockout, so that was fun to see as well. The prelims kind of saved this card because the early prelims and the main card were kind of weak, so you know what, dude, fuck it. I'm putting this card in C, bro. Okay, I can't do B. Like, maybe that makes me fucking controversial for putting 301 above it, but like, this card really didn't have shit besides the prelim, so I'm gonna put it as a C+. Definitely some good moments for sure, but kind of just your average pay-per-view, you know what I mean? Moving on up next to UFC 304 from July, headlined by Edwards versus Muhammad. Now, I'm gonna be putting this one at B+, man. I thought that this was a good card. I want to put it higher, like in the A, because I do think that it could be up there for sure, but unfortunately, there were like 6 or 7 decisions, and slow ones at that for the most part, in a row, just in the middle of the card. Like, the early prelims started strong. The main card was good, but there was just this dud in the middle of the card that just completely kind of brings it down, unfortunately, and I know that's why Dana was super pissed about it afterwards too. And also this card just being up so late for the UK fans, man. I feel so fucking bad for anyone that was there watching. It seems like it'd be tough to be a UK fan, man, so they did yell bogus. I apologize for that. But anyway, so the main event itself, I know that most people weren't expecting Bilal to win. One of my better picks of the year. I changed it like the day or two before. I'm like, no, I think Bilal's taking this one. But actually, man, I didn't think it was all bad of a fight, to be honest. The co-main event, Tom Aspinall getting the round 1 finish, absolutely fucking blistering. It was insane. Paddy Pimblett getting the round 1 finish over King Green was wild. RoboCop and Christian Leroy Duncan didn't have the best fight in the world, but it was still something on the main card. Arnold Allen and Jika Chikadze in the main card had a good back and forth scrap. That was pretty fun. So the main card and the early prelims were really good, but again, just the middle section of this, I gotta keep it into account. So overall, I'm gonna be putting this card in a B+. Not the best main event in the world, although I do think it kind of went above the expectations, at least in my opinion. And again, the early prelims in the main card were really fun. So I'm going to put this card as a B+. Really solid. I just feel bad for the UK fans that were there and had to deal with that shit, bro. So moving on up next to UFC 305. This is the Aussie card this year, headlined by Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya. A majority of you guys had this one in the S, A, or B tier, and I'm going to be putting this one in the A tier, man. I thought that 305 was really fucking good, to be honest. I mean, the main event, was it one of the most racist buildups of all time? Yeah, to be honest. But overall, the fight delivered and the buildup got a lot of people invested. So the co-main as well kind of put both guys on the map. Cargar France and Steve Ursig got a big shot, but overall, Ursig stock dropped a bit. You know, got knocked down in the first round, which was tough, but still a fun finish from Car France. Dan Hooker versus Mateusz Gamrot was one of the best fights of the year, in my opinion, and Hooker got the split decision win. You could give it to Gamrot, but either way, it was a really fun fight. I feel like it just depends how you look at it. Rosenstruck and Tuivasa was a bit of a slow fight, but it is what it is. Carlos Pratt's got a sick knockout win over Lee Jinling. So that was the main card. Really good main card, but also there were some highlights on the prelims as well, man. I mean, Valter Walker got a very weird submission win over Junior Taffa. It was controversial for a lot of people, but then commentary and all them, they kind of put it out there like, no, this is the rules, chill the fuck out, like, let's go enjoy the card. So that was a very random moment, but Jack Jenkins also got a good knockout, so there were some good finishes on this card, good moments. I'm gonna be putting it in the A. I just feel like it delivered, and like the Aussie crowd is one of the best ones in my opinion. They really get hyped, they really get after it, so I can appreciate that. We're gonna be putting 305 up there in the A tier. So moving on up next to UFC 306 Noche, whatever the hell you want to call it. This was the spear card headlined by Sean O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili. Dude, I'm going to put this one in the B tier, but honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that it was in the sphere, I'd be putting it in C, to be honest, because there wasn't a lot here. I definitely think in terms of numerical amount of fights, I think this was the smallest. I think the only early prelim there was Raul Rosas Jr. fighting on there. So not a lot of fights in the card in general. And the main and the co-main absolutely killed the momentum of the card. Okay, because I feel like once we got to the main card, they started doing all the transitions on the screens and all that. Like, I feel like it was pretty hyped. We had the Esteban Ribovic fight, which was amazing. Especially the third round was one of the best rounds of the entire fucking year. The Ronaldo Rodriguez versus Oda Osborne fight, that was really good as well. Ortega versus Lopez was fun. So the main card was riding a lot of hype. The prelims were pretty solid. I mean, Joshua Van had a good one on there. They had a really fun fight. Him and Edgar Charas, I should say. So there was substance to this card, and the fact that it was a sphere, it was hype. But like by the time that you got to that co-main, man, and like, was the co-main gonna be the best fight in the world? No, but the first two were pretty solid, so especially even more so the second one. So I feel like people were kind of expecting just a bit of a good fight, just fucking something. And it's not like Shevchenko couldn't use grappling, couldn't use wrestling. It's not like she had to just keep it on the feet the whole time, or even most of the time to make it a fun fight. But the fact that she just made the fight a fucking stinker. I mean, it's unfortunate, man. And Grasso had nothing for her down there at all. So the fact that this one was 25 minutes, the fact that it was the co-main, the fact that it was coming off of the Esteban Ribovic fight, the Diego Lopez win as well, like, this card was going kind of well, especially in terms of production. And then that just killed it. It made the stinker moments on the card stand out more. And then we went into the main event with some hope, and then that didn't go well either. I feel like it went how we expected. If Merab won, that was the kind of win we were expecting. And if O'Malley won, we were expecting like a round 1 or 2 knockout. So this is it. This is the timeline we're in, So because the main and the co-main killed the hype and the energy of the card, and also there just wasn't too much depth on this card, I am going to be putting it in B, but don't get me wrong, like Irene Aldana going out there and showing she's a fucking warrior, that was sick. Like I mentioned earlier, other good finishes and moments on this card, but just not a lot of depth, and it goes to show it relied a little bit too much on those big 3 fights, and unfortunately I think that's what hurt it the most in the end. So yeah, I'm going to be putting this one at kind of like a low B. So moving on up next to UFC 307, back to the Salt Lake City, headlined by Pereira versus Roundtree Jr. This was the first October pay-per-view. I'm going to be putting this one at a C+ in my opinion. I do think that there were some good moments on this card. The Joaquin Buckley knockout was sick. It hurt seeing it, over Wonderboy, of course, who's a fan favorite, but the Joaquin Buckley knockout was sick. The main event was a really, really good fight, and Khalil Roundtree completely rose his stock and proved a lot of fuckers wrong, or right, if you were that one guy out of like the hundreds that were picking him. But there was a lot of bullshit to this card, okay? And it's unfortunate, man, because the co-main event, Pennington versus Pena, everybody was shitting on this fight, dude. Everybody was shitting on this fight. This one, and like, what did I say earlier? Like the Bueno Silva versus Pennington fight, any Raquel Pennington title fight this year, it got a lot of heat, dude, okay? The fact that especially, too, that Pena won, and most people thought that Pennington won, that didn't help it either. Was the fight even bad? Honestly, not really, but just wasn't great, man, especially in terms of getting hyped up, and right before the Pereira fight, and just the build-up to the card, all that shit. Although in Batista, I'm so fucking sick of talking about it that it just makes me in pain, y'all, okay? It just makes me pissed off. And Batista, dude, give this guy Tom Aspinall. Give this guy an Apex featured fight, okay? Give this guy somebody outside the rankings, because fuck this guy. One of the most embarrassing performances of all time. I don't know how you get a win when you get 10 out of 10 of your takedown stuff and you don't do shit on the feet, but it is what it is, man. That was just heavy on the heart. Roman Dolidze and Kevin Holland had such a very fucking bizarre ending. The Kayla Harrison win over Vieira, I mean, just a bit of a slow performance, you know what I mean? I feel like with Harrison, she's kind of like the big draw for just pretty much all the fucking women's divisions at this point right now. So seeing her kind of go out there and like, solid win over a top-ranked name, but just not the hype we were expecting or wanting, especially after Joaquin Buckley knockout. So in the prelims itself, there was really nothing special here at all. A lot of lackluster moments overall on the card, with Buckley and Pereira kind of just saving it when you really look at it. The prelims and early prelims really didn't have much for the most part. And the main card, for the most part, was just fucking disappointing. So yeah, I'm going to be putting this card as like a C+. It is what it is. So moving on up next to UFC 308, headlined by Topuria versus Holloway. This was obviously the second October pay-per-view that we had. This card's going in S. This is like 300. Like, what am I gonna say here? Because this is just one of those like best cards of all time, man. It lived up to the hype. An amazing main and co-main, just main card in general, just prelims in general. Early prelims, there was so much name value to the card. It was one of the best main event buildups of all time. We had so many questions that we wanted answered about both of those fights. Lerone Murphy and Dan Ige had a good fight. Rakic and Ankalaev wasn't the best, but you know what? It was something. It wasn't slow, or at least relatively. Shara Bullet had an amazing knockout, one of the best ones of the year, against Armin Petrosian to open up the main card. So that was fantastic. Ibo Islan had a sick round 1 knockout, kind of putting Turkey on the map. Jeff Neal had a bit of a weird win. I do think it was kind of a clear win for him. I know that RDA kind of like lost via injury, and I feel bad for him in that regard, especially the age and point he's at in his career. But I think that Jeff Neal had the knockdown. He had the takedown already, I believe. So it's just like the win was clearly his, and he did a lot in that 90 seconds. So Matus Rebecki and Orabai had one of the best fights of the entire year. Abus Magomedov had a sick sub. Kennedy Nuzachuko had a sick knockout. There was a lot of good moments on the early prelims, on the prelims as well. I'd say the only bad point on this card was not Fakardinov opening it up and getting the robbery. But that was it, man. Other than that, it was fantastic. So totally worthy of being an S. You could argue it's better than 300. I personally have a soft spot for 300, but depends how you look at it, I guess. So moving on, up next to UFC 309, headlined by Jones versus Miocic. The annual Madison Square Garden card, dude, for November. So usually they stack up Madison Square Garden cards. Usually they're stacked. Usually they live up to the hype. But this one's not it, my friend. One of the weakest main event buildups of all time, dude. I mean, I'm just like, I couldn't get excited for the fucking fight. I couldn't. We all knew that Jones versus Aspinall was there. Aspinall got the loudest pop at the press conference, A, without even being there, B, without even being mentioned for the most part by the UFC at all times, and C, in John Jones, like in John Jones City, because people were cheering for John, but they cheered louder when Aspinall got mentioned. It was insane. So we had the wrong main event. The co-main, Chandler versus Oliveira, well, pretty much in terms of the build-up, was the only fight that was really saving the card for getting people really hyped up. Like, there were some solid name value on the prelims, but the main card, man, just let's talk about the actual delivery, right? Because the Bo Nickel fight, Bo completely dropped the fucking ball. And while I'm one of those guys, I do think that there is a lot of pressure on Bo. I do think there's a bit much pressure on Bo. Like, I get it, the dude's got to relax, gain up the experience, gain up the momentum, really learn and craft his skills. I get it, dude. Only like 6 and 7-0 or some shit like that. So I get it, but like this whole proving a point of not shooting a takedown and just kind of like throwing these big shots that aren't really doing any big damage on Paul Craig of all people, like that really let people down. The WMA fight in the main card, of course, hurt. Mauricio Rufy, got a solid win, but didn't get that crazy finish we were all looking for at a catchweight bout over a guy like James Lyontop. So I don't know, the co-main really saved this card. I mean, Jim Miller got a good finish, Marcus McGee looked good in his performance, but Martin Tybura got a solid finish as well. So talking out loud, man, there were some good moments on this card, but just overall a lot of nothingness, no aura, no energy, not a lot of hype, a lot of questionable fight IQ on this card, dude. So just in general, I'm gonna put this one as like a C. Just really didn't have anything for me. I mean, I know Mickey Gall got the soul taken out of him, and Oben Elliott got a sick knockout on the early prelims, but overall, man, I just feel like it was a disappointing card, and especially in terms of how they usually book Madison Square Garden, this one just totally fell off. So I'm gonna put this one in the C, a low C at that. You could argue D, man. I don't know, I just didn't enjoy it, man. Moving on up next to the final pay-per-view card of the year, headlined by Alejandro Pantoja versus Kaya Sakura. Obviously, this was the most recent, just happened a week ago, December 7th, so I'm really surprised that most of you guys have this one in B or C, but it's not as shocking as the fucking 302 results, so it is what it is. But I'm gonna be putting this card as like a strong A. I thought that it was really good. I just think the biggest problem with this card is that the fights that were supposed to be the high highs did not live up to it. Okay, look at the co-main. Solid fight, but was it good? Not really, to be honest, Ian Gary made it competitive, and I feel like the fun moments of that fight were mostly on his end. I feel like that and the fact that he made it so competitive is why his stock is rising so much, and he took the fight and all that. So the Ian Gary rise, but that fight in general didn't really live up to the hype that we had for it. The Volkov robbery was one of the worst of the year. Absolutely fucking horrendous. And I picked Volkov going into that fight, dude. So I was extra pissed about that one. You could argue that Aljamain Sterling got robbed. You could argue that Randy Brown got robbed. And Randy Brown versus Brian Battle was supposed to be one of the most fun fights of the card, but it did not deliver. And like I just said, most people thought that Randy Brown could have won. So again, those big fights that a lot of people were looking forward to, those ones didn't really live up to the hype. But overall, this card had so much depth, a lot of name value, a lot of good matchmaking on this fight. I think that's why we saw so many finishes, so many wow moments, because I feel like the matchmakers were fucking cooking on this one. And like I said, the high highs didn't deliver, but most of the fights in this card were finishers, and I think that was with good reason, man. I do think that the matchmaking on this card was good matchmaking. Like I said, the high highs of the card, the co-main, Gon and Volkov, Battle and Brown, I get that didn't live up to the hype, but overall, this card had so much name value, so much depth, so much really good matchmaking that I feel like it's still like the card is an A, or yeah, the card is an A even with those performances, even with some of those weird robberies, man. Because I mean, when you look at it, I mean, Chase Hooper had a sick finish. I mean, just the early prelims in general. Joshua Van put on a good performance, and the rest were sick finishes. Movsar Evlo and Aljamain Sterling actually had an entertaining fight. You know, I understand they was primarily grappling, and I thought when you kind of have like grappler versus grappler, I thought these guys were kind of gonna stand and bang a bit more. Well, I say stand and bang relatively. Okay, we're not gonna say a knockout between these two motherfuckers, but I thought we were gonna see these guys on the feet a bit more, testing each other's striking. But no, I mean, they got after it on the ground. I mean, it was actually entertaining. So that was a good one. Vicente Luque got a sick round 1 sub. He's fucking back. Dominic Reyes got a round 2 TKO over Anthony Smith. While it was depressing, don't get me wrong, we got Reyes 2-0 this year, and he's back in the win column. So I guess that's fucking something. But in the main event as well, I mean, Asakura did have a good moment or two, but overall, kind of Pantoja kind of pieced him up on the feet, rocked him a bit, and then absolutely kind of just showed that there's levels on the ground. So I get Asakura's primarily a striker, and he kind of went out there and did his thing. Would have been interesting for the division to see him win, but yeah, Pantoja. Now people are saying that this guy's like 1 win away from being the fucking flyweight GOAT. So very interesting and bizarre how that worked out, but that one delivered at least. And then Bryce Mitchell and Kron Gracie being on the main card was very, very questionable, and it was a very boring fight before that third round and before Bryce got the slam and he got those elbows in. But before that, very slow fight. But then we had Doohoo Choi, okay? And Nate Landwehr, man, didn't have shit on him to open up the main card. People were expecting that fight to be a lot more back and forth, a war on the feet, but no. Choi went out and exemplified his dominant grappling over Landwehr, which I don't think most people were expecting that to be how the fight went, you know? And the fight ended in like, what was it, like that very kind of weird TKO or whatever, because Landwehr just didn't have shit. But overall, this card, I'm going to be putting it as like an A+. I think that the moments we're supposed to carry let it down, but the card had so much depth to it and so many good matchups that it didn't even fucking matter. So, well, it mattered, but not to the point where this card is just going to become shit because of it. So overall, this is what I got. This is where I'm going to be putting every single pay-per-view of the year for 2024. So as you can kind of see on your screen, pretty mixed, you know, and like, not saying that every pay-per-view has to be a stunner. Not every pay-per-view has to, whether it's on paper or just delivery, like it doesn't have to be some stunner and live up to some amazing kind of hype, you know. I get it. You got to be realistic. It's a business. There's fight nights as well and all this shit, but just some of the matchmaking this year, some of the booking, some of the robberies, some of the fights not going, like, it's just, there was some bullshit in 2024 for the UFC, okay? And I get it. It's UFC. It's MMA. There's going to be bullshit, going to be robberies, going to be slow fights, going to be letdowns, but they have the potential to book good cards. We know, like, look at the cards that are kind of at the top. Those are the ones that you could tell they put the extra effort in booking really stacked cards in, okay? Look at the ones that are kind of at the bottom, right? Those are the ones that they kind of said, it's fine. And don't get me wrong, like, I feel like you see this more with fight nights, but there are cards that, like, don't have to be the biggest names or the best lineup on paper that go out there and absolutely fucking kill it, and they put on great fight night cards, or I mean, it could be a great pay-per-view. Like, not every card that has big name value does great, and not every card that has weak name value does bad. You know, it all depends, but we're gonna have to see how 2025 goes. I am hopeful. I do think there's a lot of potential. Hopefully they get out of the fucking Apex. Hopefully they start coming back to the States a bit more. Hopefully they kind of like stack up the fight nights just a little bit better. It's not that hard to make a solid fight night, man, you know, but you gotta give us a little bit fucking something. So even if it means having like maybe 2, 3, 4 less fight nights a year, it's fucking fine, man. Just so we can kind of pamper up the cards a bit more, you know what I mean? Handle prospects right, handle veterans on their way out right. I think 2025 has a lot of potential, but it's up to them. So thank you guys so very much for making it this far into the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let me know what you think of my rankings. What do you agree with, disagree with? Where am I stupid as fuck? Where am I right as fuck? Let me know. I want to hear your opinion. And thank you guys so very much for watching, making it this far. All the smoke MMA. I appreciate you guys so very much for tuning in, and I will see you guys next time.